Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller here with you, as usual, the host. And we have two guests, two very interesting guests who are first-timers here. Marilyn Jax, who is a multi-award-winning mystery writer, author, and Sergeant Robert Dale of the Minneapolis Police Department, and an experienced homicide detective.
Yes.
And would-be author, because he's working on a book also.
Yes.
Marilyn, when did you start writing mystery novels?
My first mystery came out in 2007. So from 2007 forward, I've been writing prolifically, I would say.
And you've written 4 books so far?
Yes.
With the same characters, pretty much
Yes.
carrying through a man and woman team of mystery solvers.
Exactly. It's the Caswell and Lombard series, and I'm working on the 5th book now in the series. And yes, it's the same 2 main characters in each book, a male and female investigator who work together to solve crimes.
Well, you were an investigator for many years with the state of Minnesota.
I was.
And what did you investigate?
I investigated real estate fraud, franchise fraud, and environmental cleanup fraud for just right under 20 years.
And that was the inspiration for you starting to write, or?
Absolutely, yes. There were many times during my career that I would have very interesting cases I was working on, and I'd always think, oh, that would make a great book someday. And while I don't really talk about actual cases in my books, my experience as an investigator, investigating fraud cases primarily, comes through in all of my novels.
Sergeant Dale, you've been how long with the police department?
I've been with the Minneapolis Police Department since 1997, so about 19 years.
And were you always a homicide detective, or did you move into that?
I gradually moved into it. I was a patrol officer for 10 years, answering 911 calls. I did that again for 10 years, and then I was a sex crimes investigator for a little over a year, and then I jumped into homicide after that. So I've been a homicide detective for about 7.5, almost 8 years now.
So a lot of background in terms of what you have experienced, and you're going to take a crack at writing, or you are in the middle of writing?
I am currently taking a crack in writing. I have a long, I have a friend of mine that I've known for quite some time, since college, and she's an author, and I've always wanted to write a true crime novel. And she's always wanted to do the same thing. So we've teamed up. It's been about 6 months now, and we're giving it a go.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How many words is your average novel?
They vary somewhat, but I would say around 90,000 would be a good average.
Because I have completed what I call a literary thriller, first draft through. I've got a couple books out, but not in that vein at all. And I have 110,000 words. And now comes the hard part of editing.
And your
at least for
editor
me.
will whittle that down a little
Yeah,
bit.
I'm sure. And
Most novels are right around 300 pages completed, 320, somewhere in that area.
although I'm sitting with a Baldacci novel right now that's 400 pages, but he's a little bit prolific.
Yeah. One of my books is close to 400 pages, but I try to keep them around 300.
Yeah, and we're going to take a look at a couple of your titles in a moment. And how far have you gotten with your writing on this?
On the book that we're
Yeah.
working on, we have gotten, I believe, a friend of mine, her name is Laurel Walsh. We've gotten, I think, the first, second chapter, and part of the conclusion almost solidified at this point. So we're in the process of shopping for agents or publishers. So
Which is harder sometimes than doing the writing.
this is my first time doing it, and I only know what I've been told so far. And speaking with Marilyn, and Marilyn and I met years ago working at a Greek festival in Minneapolis, and we've had this sort of relationship. I would see her once a year, but we'd always talk about the same things about writing books and characters and all
That's
that.
funny
so.
because I met her at Greek Fest
Yeah.
this year.
We all met at the Greek
Yeah.
Festival, yeah.
And obviously we got to talking and we invited you here, and here you both are. So wonderful.
So she's actually been sort of an inspiration for me to finally start actually putting pen to paper. So.
And we'll talk about what you do, because you do a lot of things other than just write. I mean, in terms of teaching and things like that. But let's take a look at a couple of the books that you have authored, if we can get a close-up on one or two of them, which we're good enough to bring in here with us. And there we go. We got two of them right up there. And now Never in Ink, which I have read, is your most recent.
It is. It is.
And Sapphire Trails was the predecessor to Never in Ink.
Correct. The third book in the series was Sapphire Trails, and Never in Ink is the fourth book in the series.
And who is the publisher?
I'm with Beavers Pond Press in Edina, Minnesota.
And I hear good things about them. I have not used
It's a
them.
wonderful publisher.
And you'll first learn, Sergeant Dale, the aggravation of going through, finding a good publisher and editor, most important,
Yeah.
editor.
Yeah, it's so far it's been an interesting process. I thought just writing the book would be just writing the book and be done with it, but there's so much more to do after that.
You do find out that it starts out as a labor of love, and then it becomes a labor.
Labor, yeah, right.
Writing is hard work.
It is, it is.
Yes.
Now, as opposed to, say, John Sanford, who has all of his novels located in and around Minnesota for the most part, yours are all over the world.
Well, my main two characters are located in Miami Beach. That's their headquarters. And they're really good at what they do. They're good investigators, and they're hired to solve cases that take them all over. And so my first book, The Find, is set between Miami, the Caribbean, and London. My second book, Road to Amelos, takes place on the Greek island of Crete. And then my third book, Sapphire Trails, is a Montana mystery. It's set south of Glacier in the Whitefish Big Fork, Kalispell, Polson area of Montana. And then Never in Ink takes my main two characters to Europe, to Italy, Switzerland.
I was going to say to all over Europe,
France.
yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Italy, Switzerland, and France. And I've had many readers email me and say, thank you for taking me all over the world, because you've taken me places I will never go in my lifetime, and now I feel like I've been there.
And the great thing about that is the fact that you get to go to these places and
Yes.
make it part of your novel.
Yes.
I know I wrote a lot of screenplays, and I had the experience of researching a place in the Caribbean for one of my screenplays. I had never been there. But it was, I found a place with an atrium and a waterfall and a luxury hotel. And I made that part of the screenplay. And my editor, when he took a look at it, said, "That's where I was married. How did you like it?"
Interesting.
And I didn't have the nerve to tell him I haven't been there. But that is one of the perks of writing.
I think if you write about places where you've actually been and experienced the culture, your writing tends to be more authentic.
And you have to be authentic.
You have to be authentic.
There's no question about it. Now, you certainly know about research. I'm speaking to Sergeant Dale now. Research being very much a part of any author, but also as a part of a homicide detective, walk us through where you would go. You get a call, there's been a homicide in Minneapolis, you arrive at the scene, and the yellow tape is up already.
Hopefully the yellow tape is up already. Yeah, it usually takes me about an hour to get to anywhere in the city from my house. I actually live in Minneapolis, one of the few officers that still do. But I take great pride in the fact that I still live in Minneapolis. But yeah, I mean, just, with getting, out of bed, getting dressed, taking a shower, eating breakfast, all that kind of stuff, takes you about an hour to get to a scene. And once you're there, hopefully the whole scene is protected with yellow crime scene tape. And if there are witnesses, hopefully the witnesses are being protected and watched over, and they're not allowed to talk to each other, that kind of stuff. And it's it's part
That's
of
the ideal world.
Yeah, it's the ideal, and for the most part, Minneapolis does a rather good job at securing our crime scene. So our officers out there on the front lines are really good at doing their job with that respect. And so my job when I get there is to pretty much figure out who did this. If we say we have a male homicide victim, I have to figure out, along with my partner, why this man is deceased and who did this to him.
And sometimes how he died.
Right, yeah. I mean, most of the time it's pretty apparent how somebody dies, but when it's not, then that's when it really becomes a mystery. Because that's pretty much your jumping off point, is knowing who the deceased person is and how that person died. And from there you can, sort of start your investigation from there. But it's really hard to progress forward if you don't know those two things, right off the bat.
And when does forensics come into it?
Usually our forensics department, our unit, is on 24 hours a day. So they will get there before I do. They may not necessarily do anything until I get there.
They secure the scene, but you really have to inspect it first, isn't that right?
Yeah, I'll go through and I'll say it's an indoor scene or whatever at an apartment. I'll walk around and see what's going on inside, and it's our jobs to direct the crime lab personnel to do their job. And it's a two-way street. They tell us, hey, maybe we should take this. I'm like, yeah, I think we should take that as evidence. So it's not just me telling them what to do. It's a two-way street. We help each other out.
As we look on television, we'll see like markings 27, 28, 29, which might be bullets or shell casings or something like that.
Yeah.
And at some point, the body is collected, probably for an autopsy, as well as all this evidence.
Yes.
And then your job really begins.
It does. We have to make sense of all this evidence that we gather and collect, and we test. We test things for DNA and prints. So it's our job to put all these pieces of a puzzle together to try to come up with a story of how this person died.
Now, Marilyn, who is your biggest audience so far for your books?
I would say men and women alike. And I've had 7, 12, 13, and 15-year-olds read my books all the way up through seniors. So I just have kind of a broad audience, anyone who loves a good mystery.
And you have won how many awards? More than I can count.
I think it's 25 now on my 4 books. Very humbling.
Do you submit your books to various competitions, or do
They
they
are
find
submitted.
you?
Either your publisher submits, or you submit, or someone else submits. They get to various competitions in a variety of ways.
But that's a prodigious amount of awards on 4 books.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
And it's got to make the 5th one, whenever that's going to come out, much easier to sell.
Hopefully, I would. Yeah, there's also added pressure on me to come up with another book of that caliber each time.
Now, you go to a lot of book signings,
I do.
and in fact, we met a second time at Barnes & Noble in Eagan, where you were giving really a course or a lecture to aspiring writers.
Yes.
So that's something else that obviously you do.
Yeah, a few years ago, I developed a mystery writers workshop, a 3-hour workshop, and I did it for a specific reason. When I first started writing, there are so many hoops to jump through as a new author, and there's no easy place to find out the information you need to obtain. And I remember I tried to contact a couple of very well-established authors and say, can we get together and talk about, what I should expect here? And I found very quickly that established authors, for the most part, are not willing to get together and share anything with new authors because the genre is so competitive, highly, highly competitive, the mystery genre. And so I kind of made a pledge to myself at that point. I said, if I ever become an established author, I'm going to be there for other new writers. And because of that, I developed this mystery writers workshop, and I've been teaching it now for several years, and I just love to teach it, and the response has been overwhelming.
Well, not only that, but it gets your name around in a lot of other areas also.
It does. It does. And I've had a lot of students that have taken my classes who have gone on to become published authors. And they always write and tell me that they're now published. So that's satisfying to me. I'm happy for them.
So don't share your idea, Robert, with Marilyn, because
She might steal
authors
it.
don't like you to share ideas. But one of the things when I was teaching cinema for a number of years, I would say to my students, the writing students, the first day, how many of you are married? A few hands would go up. I say, okay, you know how to handle rejection. The rest of you, you're going to have to learn, because if you're a writer, rejection is built into really the business, and you have to overcome it.
Very true. You have to have kind of a thick skin, because every author develops a following of readers who love their work, but not everyone's going to like every author's work. That's just the nature of things. So you have to have a tough skin and take the accolades as well as any criticism.
And a tough skin goes with being a homicide detective, does it not?
It does. It does.
What's the most challenging case that you have ever had?
Well, challenging can mean a few things. I could be challenged emotionally on the case. I could be challenged intellectually on a case. It's
Well, certainly the death of a child, for
Right.
instance, has got to be
right when you have
devastating.
right when you have a true homicide victim who's just going about their business, not doing anything wrong or anything, and not to say that people who do things wrong deserve to die. I'm just saying, if you're just walking down the street minding your own business, drinking a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden you're a homicide victim. I sometimes get emotionally attached to those cases, and it's you get attached to the families, the survivors of that victim too, and it's it gives you an opportunity to reflect on your own family. It's like,
And of
how
course,
would
the
that-
family
yeah.
wants results, like everything else, instant gratification, where they want instant results, and it doesn't always work that way, does it?
It doesn't. Hopefully it does, yeah, so they can have some, especially, if there's a homicide around, this time of the year when families are supposed to be getting together to celebrate each other, and when you have something tragic like that happen during these times, it's really hard to give them answers as quick as they want them to. And they may not get answers until, like you said, maybe a year or two, maybe 5 years down the road.
Now, I'm not going to ask you about ongoing cases, but there was a shooting of 5 people in a Black Lives Matter really demonstration here in Minneapolis a very short time ago. Now, is that something that you would be called in on or not? Because
no.
it wasn't a homicide.
Correct. As a homicide unit, we have about 12 investigators, and we do investigate suspicious deaths. So they don't always start off as homicides. We might also investigate a missing persons case if it's a high profile, or if there's high profile people involved in a case, we might take that too. But for the most part, one of the first questions I ask my boss when he calls me at 3 o'clock in the morning saying that there's a homicide is like, well, is this an actual homicide, or are we gonna have to wait 5 or 6 hours before this person is deceased? So it's, for the most part, we do homicides.
Now, Marilyn, what was your inspiration for getting into and tackling this tough field, this very competitive field?
My background as an investigator of 20 years, combined with my love of mysteries. Even as a child, I devoured every new Nancy Drew book as it came out. I just have always loved mysteries. And my publicist said to me, Marilyn, you see mystery wherever you go. And that's kind of true. I can go to any setting anywhere in the world, and I can just conjure up a plot in my mind.
Which finds its way into the
my
pages.
books. Yes. And so I guess that's my inspiration, my background and my love of mysteries. But my background definitely played a huge role in writing mysteries.
And rather than stay in one location, why did you decide to take your Miami couple and move them really all over the world?
I just thought it would be an interesting twist, and as a mystery author, you really want to look for something new and something that maybe hasn't been done as much as other things. And so I thought it would be fun to headquarter them in Miami Beach and then send them out on various cases. There will be books in my series that do take place right in the Miami area as well.
Now, you have one coming out. When will that be, the next one out?
The next one I'm working on right now is called The Ploy, and I'm hoping to bring it out in 2016. I also was asked to write a short story for a mystery anthology that's coming out this coming summer of 2016. It's called Cooked to Death. And I believe there's 18, I brought a little note here yes, there's 18 authors that are going to be in this anthology, including Ellen Hart, David Housewright, and some very well-known mystery authors. And we were all asked to write a short story that had something to do with food, and there will be a recipe connected to every story.
That's interesting.
Cooked to death, yes. So that was something fun to do. It was a challenge to write a story in 20 pages or less.
I think that's a sign that Chipotle has in the window right now, cooked to death.
Especially in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the misfortunes of restaurant life. And you decided, I've been doing this a long time, I have this expertise, and rather than share it with other authors, I'm going to take a crack at it myself. Is that fair to say?
It's almost fair to say, yeah. A couple years ago when we started talking about doing this, when she started telling me about the workshop she does at Barnes & Noble's, that's when we kind of came up with the idea of, like, why don't I join you and try to add some authenticity to these workshops.
And that's how so many writers really have gotten start, based on their backgrounds.
Absolutely true. I think I suggested to Robert, when I heard that he was a teacher too, he teaches classes, and I said, oh, you should come and be a guest at one of my workshops. That would be a fun thing to do.
Which he was in Egan.
And he was, yeah. Was the first one Apple Valley? I
Yes.
taught in Apple Valley at Barnes & Noble for many years until that store unfortunately closed. And he came out to Apple Valley and was a guest speaker at one of my workshops, and it was very well received. The audience just absolutely loved having him there. So I said, well, we should do this more often. And so now it's kind of become a regular thing.
Sort of,
And it's worked really well.
Somebody's an aspiring writer here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities area, wants to get some information, some training, some practice. Other than at one of your writing seminars, what would you recommend for them to do?
Other than mine. The Loft is the literary loft in Minneapolis, offers many, many wonderful classes for writers in all genres. And there's a lot of online courses that would-be writers, would-be authors can take. And my workshop is going to be, again, this coming June and October. And those are free to the attendees. They're sponsored by Barnes & Noble. So that's a wonderful opportunity for anyone interested in mystery writing or just writing in general, because I cover a lot of things that apply to all types of writing.
And beyond that, important to read.
Yes.
Read many different authors, which,
Yes.
you know, I decided a few years back when I had this idea, first germinating. Actually, it started about 10 years ago, but I really implemented it about 2 years ago. Reading as many different authors as I possibly could to get the concept, the feeling of doing that. And I'm assuming that's what you're doing now.
It's when I read Sapphire Trails last year, I think I read it. You know, when I read a book like this, I want to read something that's authentic, and once it starts to not be authentic, I put it down. And I can imagine that's probably the same for a lot of other people.
I've done the
too.
same thing with quite a
Yeah.
few books.
It turns out to be silly, and it's like, this isn't really the real world. You know, I need something more authentic, and that book definitely was. But that's you know, if I could give any advice to a writer out there, it's coming from a reader's viewpoint, just to try to keep things authentic, I guess.
Now, it's
That's a good
hard
point.
for me to realize, but look at that clock. We have gone through a half hour. We have 23 seconds left, 22 seconds left. There's much more we could have talked about, and I hope we'll have you back again. But Marilyn Jax, an accomplished and award-winning mystery writer, and Sergeant Robert Dale, an accomplished and award-winning homicide detective. Never let them get away.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
on
for having
Access
Thank you. It was a
Democracy.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.